Hello and welcome to the Progressive Hub Show. My name is Ryan Black, managing editor at progressivehub.net and organizing coordinator at rootsaction.org. With me today is Sam Rosenthal, political director at Roots Action, and India Walton, the strategic director at the Roots Action Civic Engagement Buffalo. How you guys doing today?
Good. Thanks for
Very
having us.
good.
Good. Today we're going to talk about a couple things. Biden's reelection campaign, the top shooting 1 year after a white supremacist murdered 10 in Buffalo, and the writer's strike and labor more generally. So let's get right into it. I guess to start, we talked about it last week. We're probably going to talk about it every week until it's too late. Biden is running for reelection. I guess right off the top, Sam, what are your thoughts on Biden running for reelection?
Yeah, I mean, at Roots Action, we've been opposed to him running for re-election. We ran a Don't Run Joe campaign trying to get Biden not to declare that he would run again for president, but he has. I think, my concern is still really high around this campaign. We've seen some really bad polling numbers come out this week that are, put Biden on track basically exclusively with a pack of folks who did not win re-election. On track with people like Donald Trump and Jimmy Carter and just sort of these known one-term presidents. So that's really concerning. And then I think this all comes amidst the negotiations about the U.S. debt limit, and what is becoming increasingly clear is probably going to be Biden caving to Republicans, caving to centrist Democrats on a series of demands that I think are going to be really unpopular with the American public. So, he has really low poll numbers. He's going in an unpopular policy direction, and I think that that's just a very foreboding sort of coincidence of features heading into the election year. And so my concern is at an all-time high, I'd say.
Right. And you actually just had Jamal Bowman today or yesterday came out and said, he's worried that Biden is going to move to the right on these debt ceiling negotiations, which I think anybody can anticipate that's exactly what he's going to do because that's what they always do. What are you thinking, India? What are you thinking about Biden's reelection chances?
I am thinking about my student loan repayments starting back up at the end of next month. I think there's just a lot of undelivered promises that were made. And I think that as we see the electorate move younger and more progressive, that like we just need someone who's going to be on our issues and less about the game of politics and more about the priorities of the people.
I hadn't even thought about my student loan payments in like what has it been 2 years now since we've had to pay? It's been fantastic, and now
They
I'm
can
about to
pry it
hit.
out of my cold, dead hands.
Oh, I know. The debt strikers are the best. I appreciate them so much. Yeah, we should just not pay. That'd be better. Let's just not pay. So Biden does have some challengers this time. Well, had a lot last time, but he has some right now. The media is not taking them seriously at all. Marianne Williamson, of course, who ran last time. RFK Jr., who's a new face, but a name that everybody knows, so he's doing decent in polls. And now there's even fears that Joe Manchin could run, which would throw a wrench in everything. Do we have any contenders to get behind?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, progressives are like screwed here until Joe Biden decides he's not going to run. There's too much friction between anyone who wants access to the Democratic Party machinery and the apparatus that you really need to be able to win a presidential election in this country is just not going to try to compete with Joe Biden right now while he's running for president, except for maybe Joe Manchin, who's backed basically by this group of multimillionaires and billionaires who are unhappy with either Joe Biden, who they hilariously perceive as too far left, and Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis, who they more accurately perceive as too far right. So, absent some like pool of your best friends who all happen to be multimillionaires and billionaires, there's really no way to run for president in a legitimate way if you don't have the backing of one of the parties. So, Joe Biden's just a logjam right now. No legitimate contender can get by.
Right, and I think there are positives with candidates like Marianne, like RFK, but there's also huge glaring negatives, and there's also, like you're saying, the reality that they're never gonna win. They're just not. It's just not gonna happen, and we're gonna be stuck spinning our wheels, wasting a lot of time and money, instead of just going after Biden, I guess, which is awful. It's better than Joe Manchin, I guess, but that's such a low, horrible bar. India, you gonna vote for Joe Manchin?
Absolutely not. I am brown and I am a woman, and there's nothing that Joe Manchin believes that is going to impact my life in a positive way. This reminds me of an episode of South Park, and I forget what the election was, but remember it was like Mr. Hanky running against a douchebag, right? Like,
It was a turd sandwich versus a giant douche, I remember
Yeah.
well.
right. Like we're always faced with choosing the lesser of two evils rather than being able to like choose someone who's actually good. And I think I'm tired of it. And there was lots of scrutiny around the Bernie Bros and folks just kind of sitting it out before. But like, what else can we do? Like, we keep choosing the lesser and still like getting pissed on. You can edit that part out, but like it just doesn't. It's not. There's no winning in this situation.
Yeah, and I think like the discontent with the two-party system has really accelerated over the last few elections, and it's bringing us to a really dangerous place that I don't think like the two major parties and especially the Democrats have reconciled or reckoned with yet. And I think it's like opening this lane for groups like No Labels and other people to get in there and start to say, oh, we're going to mess with um, the party process here, which I think like you know, ostensibly is a good thing, but when we see the people who are actually getting in there to blow up the two-party system, it's really bad. Like there are, No Labels is going around buying up ballot lines basically in a whole bunch of states, and so they're basically just using like the brute force of having a ton of money on hand to pick up these ballot lines. Meanwhile, there are groups like Working Families Party in New York, who's had a ballot line there for a long time, who has to like fight and scrap every election just to keep their ballot line there in New York, and it's really really hard work. It takes a ton of people power, and then you have this group that didn't exist 3 or 4 years ago that's suddenly going around snapping up outlines all over the place. So this is a really foreboding sign, I think, and like this is not the way we want to disassemble the two-party system. This is just basically giving billionaires another lane that they can play in. So I'm really worried about that, and I think that yeah, if we want people to keep turning out for elections, if we don't want our leaders to be increasingly representative of these really skewed marginal political opinions in this country, we have to push our party, in this case, the Democratic Party, to like run real candidates who don't, as India's saying, feel like they're just, the lesser of two evils, like the least shitty choice.
Right, and it seems like the Democratic Party is just so empty and they're offering voters so little when you don't have an economic message, when you don't stand with unions, when you're not increasing the minimum wage, when you're not protecting road, when you're offering nothing of material benefit to people. The only thing left are the culture wars, which are the right wings like
Mhm.
grounds. That's where they live. Those are the issues that they want to talk about. And the Democrats try to go toe to toe on that because they don't have an economic message. And yeah, I don't see a way out of this with Biden or with any of these, establishment Dem candidates, corporate backed Democrats. Moving on now. 1 year ago this week, on May 14th, 2022, a white supremacist, self described ethno nationalist entered the Tops Friendly Market in the East Side neighborhood of Buffalo, New York, and opened fire. 10 people, all of whom were black, were murdered. India Walton is from Buffalo, and she recently wrote a piece that we sent to our Roots Action list yesterday. India, you want to talk to us a little bit about that piece and the feelings in Buffalo more generally?
Yeah. So Sunday marked the 1 year anniversary of the racist terrorist attack on the only grocery store that exists within many miles in Buffalo's East Side, which is predominantly black. Um, and It wasn't as active with the media as it was last year, immediately following, but there was a lot of media, there were lots of dignitaries. And when the story opened last year, so the massacre happened in May, clearly, and the store reopened in July. And when the store reopened, there was a ceremony and there were poets and there was a prayer and a vigil, but there was a fence around the parking lot and you couldn't get inside the rededication unless you were invited. And this felt very similar, right? At the memorial, there was a moment of silence. The governor came and spoke, the mayor spoke, all of the important people were there, and they were under a tent and they were seated. And members of the community were standing, and a lot of people couldn't see the speakers, couldn't hear the speakers. Um, and the sentiment is that a whole year has passed. We've gotten lots of promises, people pretending to be outraged and denouncing white supremacy, but nothing has changed. Housing is deplorable. This is a neighborhood that lives in abject poverty. Um, you know, the plans to increase food access in this neighborhood have come from the community and not from the administration of the city, not from the state, not from any of these folks who are so-called leaders in this community. And I think that there's just a lot of frustration that we get more of the same, and the emphasis has been more on gun control, which is important, right? Assault weapons should just be banned. There's no reason to have an AR-15. However, the reason why this person was able to drive from 200 miles away and target Black people, many of whom were pillars in our community, elders in our community, the reason why he knew he could target a predominantly Black store is because it is the only one. It's the only one that people in that neighborhood have to shop at. Notwithstanding that it is substandard in the first place, right? It was substandard. They've done renovations. The store looks better, but there's still not a butcher in the store or fresh seafood. Um, I could go on and on with the complaints, but part of the reason why I am so excited to be in the position that I in, working for Roots Action Civic Engagement, is because the problem lies in the leadership. And the way that we change that is through voter engagement, through civic engagement. So I've been, talking to young people about how power works within the city of Buffalo, making sure that our young people and not so young are registered to vote and know that they actually have choices, because who governs really matters when it comes to things like where grocery stores are located, the quality of our housing and streets and things like that. So it was a somber time, but I'm very hopeful that this will compel people to pay a little bit more attention to how our local government is run.
Yeah, and if you go to progressivehub.net, you can read the email blast that India wrote that we sent out, I believe, yesterday. And like always on Progressive Hub, you can read a story and immediately take action about it. On this one, we are asking you to write your representative and senators about gun violence. But as India just says, it's not just a gun problem. It's much bigger than that. It has to do with poverty and racism as well. So, India, what do places that aren't Buffalo, or what can Buffalo do? But what can every city in the country do right now to help prevent this, to stave this off, to create stronger communities? Uh, what are the steps that need done? What would you like to see happen?
I would like to see people organize their people. And as I'm talking at colleges and universities and even in high schools, when people ask me this question, check your people. If a lot of people say, well, we don't talk politics at family gatherings or whatever. Racism isn't politics is racism. So when you hear somebody repeating a stereotype or a trope, feel free to just say it's not true. I don't care whether it's your mother or father or uncle or grandparent. Like, people need to be corrected, and need to know that that type of behavior is unacceptable. I think that we live in a climate where we are increasingly seeing racism be normalized and white supremacy being normalized, right? Being anti-racist or even being non-racist is now being classified as wokeness. And there's some negative connotation now, right? Where everyone's like, if you take other people's identities into consideration, now you're somehow woke or a leftist, and not a mainstream American. And we need to reject that on all fronts.
Right, wokeness, which nobody really says anymore, is being weaponized to just basically be like, you shouldn't be nice to people anymore, right? You shouldn't care about people's feelings. Yeah. So moving on again, the Roots Action Education Fund brought lunch to Writers Guild strikers on Friday. Our own social media expert Richie was able to chat with some of the strikers, and I wanted to show one of those interviews now. His audio is a little low, but you'll hear her just fine.
Like, what's something really particular that you're sticking on to?
Well, I'm an episodic television writer primarily. I've done some feature work, but I think there's a lot of questions and kind of confusion about, well, what are you trying to get? And I think it requires some understanding of how television is made. So I could talk a little bit about that. There's 3 phases of making a TV show. There's pre-production, production, and post-production. And writing happens through all 3 phases. And I think just that basic understanding, and we have, I think that television and movie audience is way savvier than maybe it used to be because of social media and because, people who are fans of shows deep dive into them now and maybe understand that. But so what happened when streaming came, Netflix and streamers in general, is that they decided to kind of break the model and say we're only going to use writers for the first third of making television. And so that's when we talk about this being a fight for a middle-class writer and a fight for making sure that we can pay our rent, which is kind of hard for people to understand. Well, how can Hollywood writers not pay their rent? So that concept of doing that, of only using writers a third of the time, is basically to cut costs from writers specifically, which to me, as a writer, is a crazy thing to do. But the idea is, let's pay them as little as possible. Let's use as few as people as possible. And we'll give them as little as we're required to give, which luckily is dictated by the minimum basic agreement that we have, and what we negotiate every 3 years is that's what we're negotiating now. So that broke the model of making television, and it gave people what we're calling a kind of, what they're forcing, a gig economy into a union, or a freelance, model into a union, which we can't allow. The head of the AMPTP, while we were negotiating, and I was there for this, said, writers are lucky to have term employment. And that's not luck. That's being a member of a union. And so I think just understanding that 70% of us are episodic television writers. So just kind of understanding that model. And so what does it mean? Why are writers working for less weeks for less money? Hopefully that gives you a little bit of background about what that is.
So what has your experience been like negotiating with the studios?
Yeah, it was really interesting. So this is the first time I've ever been a member of anything like this, a committee for the Guild, certainly a negotiating committee member. They devalue what we do, and I think I knew it. I've been doing this for 20 years, so it's not like I get it. It's a business. Everyone here understands that it's a business, but it's still a craft. It's still an art form. And I was talking to someone on the picketing line recently who said when they started calling it content, that's when things really started to get off the rails. And I think she was right. I think it's true. And so I think just talking to them about, they would tell us, well, it's too soon. We don't know how streaming is going to make money. We can't figure this out, even though Netflix, who exclusively streams television and movies, no other secondary source, had $6 billion in profits last year. But it's like, we're not sure. Not all of us are profitable yet. But then they go tell Wall Street, we're profitable. ahead of schedule. So it's like we're writers, but we understand math. I mean, we get, we get it. This is making money, and all we're asking for, in all the things we asked for, totaled up to less than 2% of the profits they make just off of what we make for them, just off of film and TV. And I think when people hear numbers, it might all sound crazy, but when you just get a percentage perspective, it's like we're just looking for a little piece of what it is that we help contribute. Actors contribute to it, directors contribute to it, our crews contribute to it. There are talented members of IATSE and the Teamsters and all of the other unions who, are standing in solidarity with us. Everyone contributes to making a show. We start with the page, we create the characters, we create the worlds. And so we just want a piece of what it is that we do that they are, in fact, making a profit off of.
Last question. What do you hope to achieve with this strike?
We want to,
Other than
a fair deal. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of power. This is my second strike. So, and 15 years ago, I was out here walking a picket line. I was not a show creator at that time. I wasn't what we call a showrunner, who are ultimately just writers. We're all writers, people who make TV. I think there's something really powerful about being in a union. And I think our union members, we have a much different union than we did back then in terms of the door finally opens to writers who are representing, underrepresented communities. And, I'm a Latinx writer, and I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've seen the positive changes. And I think our union understands the power of being a union in even a different way. Like I said, we had a membership meeting the Wednesday, was that a week ago Wednesday? I don't even know what today is. It's only been 2 weeks. We had a membership meeting after we called the strike, and unions from all across Hollywood were represented. That's completely different than what happened in 07, 08. I think this landscape is totally different. So I guess, much like the labor movement that's happening all over America right now and globally, that's us too. We're working writers. There are those of us who are living paycheck to paycheck. It's an unstable business. And I think one thing other than a fair deal, that I think will come out of this is the power of unions. I can feel it. Like I just know we understand better. Other unions are here for us, and we will be there for them.
While being on the negotiating team, does that kind of solidarity give you more, more willpower to say no, we're gonna strike? Just like, what does that solidarity mean to you, specifically being on the negotiation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, we're a Democratic union, so we have to take a strike authorization vote before we even got here, and that vote was 97.85% yes. That was a huge turnout, and so that gives us power. The idea that our membership is behind us and saying, yes, we're willing to strike, and then absolutely, we had union members, leadership that came with us to the table some of the days, and, we're telling these big CEOs, these big, multi-billion-dollar corporations that just keep they just keep vertically integrating and buying each other, and we're telling them that we're still unions here within this business model. They're figuring out how to make money, and we're going to stand up to get a piece of that money. And so, yeah, I think that the camaraderie among unions right now is huge and gives us in the negotiating room for sure, but also just out here on the picket line. It makes us feel stronger. I mean, LA is a union town. That's the truth. And, Hollywood is a union town, and I'm very proud to be a member of a union out here fighting for what's fair and what's right.
It is nice to see the excitement and the energy and the horns honking and the people and the signs. And from what I hear, these are some of the best signs ever because it's a bunch of writers coming up with like amazing signs. Why should we support the writers' strike? Sam, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think at an elemental level, this is just part of being in solidarity with workers who are striking anywhere. So, whether it's a really large visible strike like this one, where it's a lot of people with big public facing platforms taking on a huge industry that's known all over the world, or if it's a local doing at a bus building factory in a particular state, like we should always support striking workers wherever they are. um, I think though that there's another interesting element to this strike that came out in the interview a bit, which is this question of big, multinationals leveraging emerging technology, so like AI and things like that, where they're really trying to figure out if they can completely or almost completely get rid of the people that work at these places. So, um, the idea here is like that they're going to start feeding AI scripts, or start feeding scripts that were written by people into like an AI, and generating this sort of endless stream of content as it's, as um, the striker was just saying, like this is all being rebranded as content, and then you're going to just have like basically like riffs on a theme forever and ever. And from the studio's perspective, that's fine because it's more content. They can churn out like 500 Marvel movies that way. But from our perspective, as workers, like obviously that's terrible, because there's clearly over the last 10-15 years been this drive to figure out what is the minimum number of people we can employ while still being hugely profitable and still expanding our reach. And also, like on a human level, I don't think we should want art that's just a regurgitation of like 5,000 other things that have been thrown into a blender. Like we should want art where it's individual people seeing if they can push the limits of their art form, and seeing if they can create something new, create something that an audience hasn't seen before. Like I think people and consumers are smarter than that, and they want good content. And I think it makes us all unhappy when we're like subjected to the same stuff over and over again. So there's a lot that's tied up in this. I think like the other day I was reading that someone who works at an audiobooks company was saying that they're going to try to phase out their readers of audiobooks and have an AI just reading the audiobooks, from now on. So it'll just be like this very realistic AI voice that you'll hear reading your audiobooks. I think we should put our foot down and say, no, these are jobs for people. These aren't jobs for machines. And we demand that we have art that's created by real people. We demand to hear a human voice on the other end of this interaction. And so that's part of it too.
Yeah, how do you duplicate a Morgan Freeman story being read to you? You like that's not fair. I think that we are definitely in the era of the reinvigoration and the rise of the proletariat. People are tired of working for less. It's just enough is enough. Shout out to Workers United. Buffalo is the home of the Starbucks unionization movement, and it's an exciting time in labor right now, and I'm really excited to see all of the workers coming together to fight back against the corporate greed.
Totally.
One
And like another thing that you see is I feel like these companies keep getting surprised, that like they're gonna like shit on the workers, and then they're actually going to stand up and say something about it or do something about it. They're going to organize, they're going to push back, they're not going to accept that they're just getting less for more. And so I think that's really heartening, and it's great to see that reaction being so widespread.
The scary thing for me, one thing you just said about the audiobooks. I'm an avid audiobook listener, and people care about the reader of the audiobook. There are famous audiobook readers. There are voices that you rely on and that you very much enjoy reading. When you rate an audiobook on like what's Amazon's audiobook thing called? Whatever. It asks you to rate the reader as well, the voice you heard. To replace that with an AI would take so much richness out of books. I had never even thought about that, which is the scary thing about AI. We have no idea what all industries it's going to affect, how many people from where it's going to replace. And I think that's what makes supporting the writer strike so important. This is, ground zero, for lack of a better term, for the workers versus AI war that's going on right now. And to keep power for the people and for workers right now, we have to make sure that we don't let AI anywhere where there's a union, anywhere where people can work together to prevent AI from taking their jobs. They should. And like you mentioned as well, Sam, you can't really push boundaries if an AI is just an amalgamation of 5,000 articles that it's read. Then it's created its own boundaries. It can't create art that pushes beyond them. And not to mention, those boundaries are created by the art and the words that AI has stolen and ingested from actual artists and writers. So
Yes, that's
yeah,
right.
I mean, it's critical that we support these strikes. So, and thank you to Richie and Hanya from the Roots Action Team who went out there and fed those strikers on Friday tortas from a local torta taco cart, and they were apparently a big hit. So hopefully we get out there again soon to feed some people. There's some other things going on in labor as well. Sam, you want to give us a couple more updates?
Sure. So, I mean, I think the big thing that's looming is this question of the UPS strike, which, we're going to find out, uh, I think, at the beginning of July, whether or not UPS workers are going to strike. And this would be this would be one of the biggest strikes that we've seen, um, in the last few decades in this country, and definitely would be one of the largest strikes during this strike wave, that we've seen with Amazon and Starbucks. And so this will be immediately something that the Biden administration has to contend with. It will make the railway strike look like small potatoes. I mean, this would be like just a hugely disruptive event. So it will be a really interesting political litmus test for the administration. Are they going to, as they did previously with the railway strikers, just try to break the back of the union and make it illegal for the strike to continue? Say that this is something that the interests of capital override the interests of the workers and the interests of working people in general in this country, and we're going to have to shut it down? Or are they going to defer to the process and try to let the workers actually negotiate, have a fair stake in negotiations? I don't know. I'm not that optimistic, but I think that nevertheless, this will be like a really galvanizing moment in general for labor and for everyone who thinks of, themselves or their organization as being an ally to labor, working in solidarity with labor. It's going to be important for folks to get out on picket lines if you can, to support the strikers materially otherwise if this happens, because it will really be a determinative moment, I think, for the direction that organized labor is going in this country.
Yeah, and it's 340,000 UPS workers who are preparing to go on strike. That is a huge, huge number. Unfortunately, Biden hasn't given us a lot of reasons to think that he's going to side with the workers, especially since it's a transportation thing, it's a shipping thing. It has to do with protecting capital and protecting business owners. And I think we know whose side Biden is on in those kind of issues. So, not good. But there's some other things. Congress officially acknowledged Apple's unfair labor practices. That's good. The SEIU in New Hampshire is not endorsing Biden. That's good. And then you had the Rutgers University faculty were on strike in April, and they concluded that with a stronger contract that sounds like it's generally supported. So labor's making moves. Labor's making moves. Do we think it's here to stay? Do we think this is just a blip on the radar? I hope not.
I think that people are increasingly keenly aware of the wealth inequalities, and that it's not because of talent or hard work of the ultra wealthy. It is because of the workers who are making them that way. And it's my hope that this is here to stay. And I'm looking forward to the gig workers unionizing. I mean, I'm looking forward to the gig workers divesting and starting cooperatives instead. But I think a union is a great first step to some protections for workers. I'm thinking back to 2021 when the nurses at a local hospital went on strike. I like the importance of the safety of nurses and good health care for nurses and frontline workers, good health care for everyone. Like, all of the American people deserve good health care. And the Verizon strike, and now, man, this may have been about 10 years ago now. Do you remember the Verizon strike?
I
I
was on
changed
the I was on the line with the Verizon strike. That was like the first line I was ever on.
I changed my cell phone plan. I changed my cell phone company because I was not crossing that picket line. So definitely pro labor all the way, and I'm excited to see just the growth of the movement is becoming a lot younger, a lot more progressive, a lot more diverse. One of my major criticisms of labor has been like it's mostly cis white males in leadership, right? So we're seeing just a lot more diversity, and I think that particularly people in my generation, we had our work week protected by legislation, our rights protected by legislation, and now we're seeing people just violate all of the things that the labor movement was originally built on, right? An 8-hour work day, 40-hour work week. So people are just saying like enough is enough. I'm not going to work to line the pockets of the company owner when I'm the one who's doing all of the work.
Yeah, totally. And the other thing that makes me feel better about it is like we're seeing like strike activity and labor activity obtain at like every size organization, every sort of level of employment. From like UPS, as we were just discussing, to like this Bluebird manufacturing plant I alluded to earlier, individual Starbucks, individual Amazon warehouses. And I think that that's really like how movements take hold, is that there's activity at all the different levels where people are operating. And so that gives me a lot of hope. Like, I don't think that's easily snuffed out by capital because it's becoming really entrenched.
We even have some local nonprofits who are unionizing, right? Like the social justice world has always been like, well, we treat you pretty good. You don't need a union. And they're like, full
Right.
stop, right? So it's definitely here to stay.
Well, thank you both very much for joining us this week. Sam Rosenthal, Political Director at Roots Action in India, Walton, the Strategic Director at the Roots Action Civic Engagement, Buffalo. Thank you so much, and we will talk again soon.
Thanks, Ryan.